community, and the purpose being to ignite our thinking about coaching, the profession, our practice, really stimulate some new thinking for us tonight. And I think we're certainly in for a treat with Dr. David Drake joining us. Before I introduce him, may I just share some ground rules if we can ensure that we're muted during the presentation. We welcome you to put comments and questions in the chat box as we go. And if you've got any urgent questions or messages, please do a direct message through to Vicky Browning. That would be appreciated. We are going to have 2 pauses during the session when we'll be discussing and exploring some of your questions. So you can either hold them or you can put them in as if you've got a burning question as we go. The Association for Coaching has a policy of creating a human-only environment. So we please want you to ensure that we have no AI meeting bots, such as automatic transcribers or note takers in the room with you, so that, it is us and we're here to connect together as humans. Today's session, as you've seen, will be recorded, and the recording will be shared with you afterwards, which obviously will also include any slides that are in the session today. So to introduce you and welcome David Drake, and I think for many of you, he needs no introduction. I know you have a lot of friends and colleagues in the room with you here today, but I will say a few words. And he is a coaching pioneer who's worked in this space for nearly 30 years. He's the founder of the Moment Institute, which, if you look at it online, it's a very innovative global learning community. He's an advisor and contributor to Ovida and 2 other AI coaching startups, and has used that work with clients such as CBA, Dropbox, Google, Logitech, Nike, I should say, Westpac, and many others. He's the creator of 4 bodies of work: narrative coaching, narrative release, integrative development, and the 5 maturities, which we're keen to hear more about this evening. He's a thought leader for the Institute of Coaching, an inaugural member of Coaches 50, and I think now at least 10 times a summit speaker and an EMCC master practitioner. He's written over 80 publications, which has included the one many of us would have read, Narrative Coaching, and we're excited about the forthcoming book, The 5 Maturities, Transforming How We Work in a World Beyond Coaching. That title is enticing as it is. My personal insight into David Drake's work was, and his genuine passion for deepening our collective coaching practice, was when I attended the IOC conference in Boston in 2017, where a room full of coaches were guided by David to experiment with new skills in paired conversations. And we were almost spellbound by the richness of the connection with others as a result of the tools that he gave us. And I'm sure many of you have also got stories that you can share of working with David. So we feel very privileged to have you here with us this evening to ignite our thinking at this particular time in the world when we're noticing so much turbulence and instability for our clients, for our environments, and for our profession. And I am going to quote, hopefully not misquote, from the preface of Narrative Coaching: "The literal and developmental thresholds we must cross are not for the faint of heart or the ill-prepared, but are essential for those who are serious of bringing their new story to life." So, David, we welcome you to support us in being more prepared for the future of coaching and to bring the new stories we want to bring to life. And as we share with you what the world needs now from coaching. So please make David very welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. So just one caveat and then a fun story to begin. So I've had long COVID for almost 4 years. So sometimes my voice drops out it's affected my throat quite a bit. So if at any point you can't hear me, it's my spiritual practice just to stay aware of my voice. But if you can't hear me, just flag me down. I don't take it personally, and I'll do my best to speak as loudly as I can. Okay. So I want to just start with two pieces of context for the talk. So one is I go back to 2005, 2006, and I will always be grateful to Australia, which is where I presented on narrative coaching for the very first time. And when at the University of Sydney conference, but then I was invited back to the fledgling Sydney chapter of ICF to do a session. I don't know if any of you were there then, but I had an extraordinary demonstration we did up front with this young woman that was it was I was really stunned by the whole thing and really moved by her journey. And then when we opened it up to questions, the first and most persistent question I got or comment I got was, "That's not coaching." And I remember being really baffled by the question because here's a person that had a transformative experience for herself, and coaching then was still in kind of Wild West time, so it wasn't really that clearly defined, anyways. And I think that sort of really stuck with me for a long time, and it's the same question comment I get pretty much anytime I do a demonstration. And I used to be bothered by it, and now I just sort of smile and say, that's true. And your view of coaching, what I did does not fit in that box. And I'm not interested in that box. I'm interested in the human being in front of me. And so the that remains one of the impetuses for the five maturities. And the second one was there was a group of scholars from the UK that wrote a paper on working with ICF to create team coaching competencies. And they used an old model I'd done like 15 years ago as their best structure for doing that. And I thought, well, maybe there's still some value in that sort of thinking. And as I started moving back into this and began to really expand on something I'd done for quite some time about what knowledge do you need to be a coach, and then evolved in this whole recognition, having traveled the world to work with coaches, I observed that the biggest distinction in the quality of the coaching was not how many certificates they had, but how mature they were as a human being. And so I started to realize we load up coaches with all kinds of stuff, but we don't actually, unless they take initiative themselves, we often don't do enough to evolve them as a human being. And I think we live in a time where people are desperate for human contact. And I believe you could actually, and I've done this for a couple of clients, I've actually sat in almost in meditation for a significant amount of time with clients and said nothing. And several of them reported it was the best session they ever had. And so, what I'm going to offer today is just some of my thoughts and my observations, some from the book that's coming out in August on the five maturities, and some just my reflections on kind of where I think the field's at. And so, there's, like we shared before, we'll share 5 or 6 slides and some thoughts, and then we'll have sort of moments of pause where you can ask questions, share your insights, offer rebuttals, whatever kind of inspires you. If you're somebody that wants to stay present, you can just put a question in the chat box so it already exists, and then we'll have some times for you to check in and see kind of what you think. All right. So let's see if we can share the slides. All good. All right. So there we go. Except for the title's gone. Wonder if it comes up if I do this. It does. Excellent. Um, Um, yeah, so I want you to remember this image because it's in sharp contrast to the one that comes right after this. This is probably my most used slide in all my presentations over, I don't know how many years. And I offer it here as a reminder that uh, done well, this talk will help you get rid of a bunch of things more so than add things. And what we teach our students and help them develop is this notion that you don't need nearly as much as you think you do. and that agility is matters more than having a U-Haul trailer full of stuff. And so we just use this as an inspiration about inviting ourselves to travel more lightly. So I'll leave that with you. So this is not the way forward. Um, and so what we find from a lot of our participants in our programs is they spend the first half of the program getting rid of all the stuff they realize they don't need anymore. And so pick your gender, pick your metaphor, but I don't want you to feel like this talk will be adding to a bigger rock or putting more stuff in your backpack. Um, and what you'll discover as we all mature as coaches, and I saw this even in some of how you all checked in, was that people are just hungry for people. And they don't, the sort of obsession with goals, which may you rest in peace. I argued relentlessly with Tony about this. Um, and people are needing something that's much more existential and much more essential now. And we can't show up with lots of stuff because that keeps us from having that kind of conversation. So for me, what I sort of think is coming instead. Is a call to show up in new ways to our clients. Um, to You look at what's happening with our climate, our environment, and our sort of disruption and disconnection from each other. People are wanting to connect to life, to purpose, to meaning, to recognize we share the same fate as a common human species. And a big one for me, and it's one of the things I most treasure in my life, is the 5 years I spent running an Aboriginal leadership program. And in the best of their traditions, this emphasis on collective wisdom, not individual knowledge. Um, and then lastly, the piece is that I always, we talk about in many ways, coaching is not really the point. Even what really is the purpose of our work to me is to help the person become the person they're seeking to become so they can do what they need to be doing that's important to them. And so I borrowed this notion from a couple of different sources, but this notion of how do we help the person find access to healing within themselves? And part of that, and I'll talk about this in a few minutes, is moving beyond a focus on the session and beginning to look at how do we help people do what matters most from coaching, I would argue, which is develop the capacity to do this for themselves. So in some ways, as I'll share in a minute, the session becomes less important and much more important is what do they take with them that they can do later on their own and see as something they've done for themselves. Um, and so for me, um, we live in a time when a lot of our historical narratives are breaking down. And a lot of our institutions and structures that we counted on for civil society are under great duress for a whole host of reasons. And so it's a time when we need to, in some ways, get more serious about what coaching really needs to become. And for me, that has fundamentally to do with our level of maturity. Um, and the phrase that you can read all this on the screen, but we live in a very precarious time in human history. We've been here before as a species and we'll be here again, but this seems particularly profound because it's happening in our lifetime. And so the phrase that I'll keep coming back to is as a way I think about what do I do or how do we think of coaching. I think of this as conscious improvisation. It's not about methods, it's not about formulas, it's not about tools, it's not about competency models. It's about what can I bring to this moment in time with another human being to enrich the experience we're having and enrich the possibility that they'll be able to do what matters most to them. And we'll talk a bit more about how we kind of get there. So for me, and I'll just share a couple more, and then we'll introduce the five maturities, and then we'll take a quick pause. All right. Um, and so for me, a lot of what maturity brings is the ability to fundamentally trust ourselves. when we don't trust ourselves, we're grabbing for all kinds of stuff we've collected, or we're trying efforting. And one of the things we tell our narrative coaching participants is we, especially in the beginning, and especially if they're transitioning from a more traditional form of coaching, is when they're practicing, we encourage them to just stop coaching for a minute. And what we observe is that they're efforting so hard to try to be a coach that they're actually missing most of what's actually happening right in front of them. And so I wrote the book on the five maturities because I wanted to find ways of languaging. How do we develop practitioners who can be fundamentally and radically present to people and to the moment and to the opportunity, and spend much less time trying to do coaching? Um, and so for me, I feel like that deep, deep trust in ourself is in some ways we're modeling that for our clients. Many of our clients, I observe that's true for me, may be true for you. They're showing up more anxious, more uncertain, um, um, and with a lot more levels of things happening in their life than maybe 5 or 10 years ago. And so it just calls for, and the way I would describe this before we move into the five maturities is the world in which coaching was born. And I've been at this for 30 years. That world is gone. I grew up in the part of the world where coaching was born in many ways in the Bay Area of California. And that world is gone. And with it, the way in which we think about coaching was made for a world that no longer exists in some ways, and is certainly not up for the world that's coming very quickly. And so for me, I realized we have all these amazing, talented people, and my wish now is to not change ourselves so much as free ourselves to work more like this. And I'll tell you a little story that will then set us up for the five maturities. And it's about fireflies, which is what this AI image is about. So years ago, I was in a state of in the U.S. called Pennsylvania. I was in a very rural area. I'd been there for 3 days as part of a systems symposium for my PhD program. It was, as it often is in that part of the world, it was very hot during the day and very cold at night. But we addressed, as you do when you're students, we addressed kind of casually. So I was wearing short pants and a short sleeve shirt all day long. And as you do when you're at that kind of event, we stayed up all night and talked and had some bottles of wine might have been involved. Um, and and then I came out and I realized that there was a new moon. It was cloudy. There's no lights anywhere. It's pitch dark. You can barely see in front of you. And my cabin was about a quarter mile up this dirt road. And so I thought I can walk and be safer because I can't really see anything. And there was trees as well. So it literally was like dark. I could walk and be safe, but that'd be quite cold and uncomfortable. Or I could run. I liked running, so I could run and sort of take a risk that I might not see something. So I decided to run. And so I'm running up this dark sort of dirt road in the dark. And all of a sudden, I look on both sides of me, and the bushes are lighting up. And as a kid growing up in California, I didn't know what this was. And then I remembered, I think this part of the world has these things called fireflies. Um, and what I started to realize was the vibration of my feet activated these bugs in the bushes because if I looked behind me where I was no longer running, it was pitch dark again. If I looked way in front of me, it was pitch dark again. And so for that quarter of mile, a couple hundred meters, several meters, I had my own private landing lights all the way back to my cabin. And I remember sitting on the porch of my cabin and having tears in my eyes and said, why can't we make life feel like this for all of us? And for me, that became the fundamental frame for how I think about coaching. I don't actually do coaching. I am a coach. And my job is to trust myself, trust the client, trust the moment, and allow myself to provide just enough scaffolding and lighting so they can see what's right in front of them. Um, and for me, it's really changed fundamentally how I think about coaching. And that's what went on to create narrative coaching. It went on to create everything else that we did. And then I realized, well, how did I get to be able to do that? And I realized I've never taken a coaching program in my life. That's one of my true confessions. I've taught them for 25 years, and I've done a whole bunch of other things to make me the human I am for better or worse. So I created this thing called the five maturities, and I picked the number five because in the West we often think in two by two matrices, very static, very binary, very a lot of things. And I've often been drawn much more to Eastern traditions, and so a pretty deep study of Taoism has informed all of my work. And that in those traditions, I think in terms of fives because they have a fifth element, which is usually around motion. And so I created these five maturities. And so I want to just put up what we think of as the five maturities wheel. Um, and then I'm going to give you, I'm going to make fun of myself with a story to illustrate why this matters. Um, so, for each of these, there's a primary gift it brings. There's the maturity itself, and then there's a mastery that it makes possible. There's also a third M, mobility, but that started to get crowded. And just as a point of context, for in the book, I've developed a three-dimensional adult development model that moves beyond vertical and horizontal to account for the fact we have to actually be agile in making choices about how to be in any moment in time, which is around mobility. But I'm just going to keep it simple here. So the premise being that we've obsessed in some quarters of coaching on competencies, which are fine. You know, if I'm training chefs in for a restaurant, I want to know that they know which end of a knife to hold, right? But competencies are only one of five masteries, and in many ways, they're not even the most important one after a while. And that each mastery, our ability to improve each mastery, is in many ways fundamentally linked to our level of maturity. So the primary gift of personal maturity is it deepens what we can draw on in ourself. And that gives us more capacity to hold space for our clients. So if you've never resolved like big griefs in your life, or you've never allowed yourself to be angry, and if you've never traveled outside of your hometown, if there's things, if you've never had certain experiences or you've never done the inner work yourself, you're not going to be able to very effectively and hold that space for others. And so our clients bring us all kinds of stuff, right? And so our maturity is, and to show up to them is really, and our capacity to show up to them is really fundamentally a function of what we can draw on when we're dealing in real time with what our clients are bringing to us. Okay. The second one, if we can't draw on something, maybe we don't like uncomfortable feelings, maybe we don't like speaking up or whatever it is true for us, then we don't even see things because we don't want to go there, so we don't even notice that it's present. We only see what our mind already believes most of the time. So this is where, for me, spiritual maturity comes in, and this may or may not involve religion for you, but it really is about the development of our inner wisdom, our ability to self-regulate, our ability to take multiple perspectives, our ability to hold dissonance and not try to foreclose on that. And what this does is it brings us clarity. So much of what we end up doing in the end in coaching, and which is why we sometimes run into issues with sponsors, is that the reason why most clients come to coaching is not the reason they think they're coming to coaching. And so a lot of what we're doing is a lot of times they're seeing their own issue or their own need or their own opportunity through maybe a lens that has a narrative attached that's not productive for them or is only part of the picture. And so, what spiritual maturity does for us is it helps us see way more in many more dimensions, many more elements, so that we have a much clearer picture about what's actually happening in front of us. So for me, this is the bedrock of coaching, right? This is actually more important in many ways than some of the mechanics of coaching. Um, and so this is the foundation for the most familiar one to us, because it's the one that associations and others and coaching programs often focus on. And this is what you can do. And this has to do with our professional maturity. So yes, there are some basic fundamental competencies of coaching. Um, but the reality though for me, and part of what sort of, if you will, rail against in the book is competency models are great for beginners. They're really helpful if you've never coached or you've never worked in a helping profession that way before. It's good to get competent at some fundamental things like active listening, asking decent questions, being present to people. But scaling competency models is not a path to mastery. Masters of any craft are not advanced novices. They're a wholly different category of people. And so for me, particularly with unnamed associations, which are not yours, um, there's an obsession with competency models that are just really not helpful. They're counterproductive in many ways because what they breed is a desire to conform. And so you see, so there's a couple of really interesting anecdotes that illustrate this. What one of the associations discovered was that you now have the AI tools to actually simulate an entire session in your own voice that's not you at all. And the reviewer can't tell it's not you. And so then that unnamed association started complaining about the practice. And my response was, maybe that's just saying that people are gaming a system that doesn't work. And so for me, I think one of the opportunities around the five maturities is to rethink how do we develop the caliber of human beings that we need as in the coaching space now. And competency will be part of that, but it will be a much smaller part, I believe, than what's coming up as important now. Because for me, it's the first two and the last two which matter more. This is sort of the hygiene factor in the middle, but it's the one we often spend a lot of time on. But I would argue that it may be far less important than we think. So this has to do with what you can do well. And this has a lot to do with social maturity, which has to do with the ability to read your environment and to be able to recognize gender, culture, situation, status, all kinds of things. And this has to do with capabilities. It's the wisdom and exquisiteness with which we can apply our competencies. And so, why this matters is in the early days, a lot of coaches were taught you have to have lots of powerful questions. It's not true at all. Memorizing lists of questions will not make you a better coach. And so what we found when I used to observe it, and I still see this, not as much as before, but newer coaches, when they're practicing, it ends up feeling like benevolent interrogation. It's endless series of questions. That's not helpful to anyone. So the maturity would say, what else might I be doing here? Gathering more information or probing probably is not what the person needs. Again, if I have the capacity to observe that, if I have the clarity to realize this, and then say, what other competencies might I need now? Or how can I reframe that competency to match what's required of me now? So when I used to travel a lot, when I lived in Australia and traveled throughout Australia, when I traveled all over the world, demonstrating narrative coaching for different graduate programs in particular, one of the things that was most surprising to people was how little I talked in the session. I said, I'm not being paid to talk. I'm being paid to hold space for people to do their work. And then they said, but yeah, but your sessions were so much briefer, and you got this student who we've known for a year to say things he or she's never said with us before. And I said, in part it's because you spend too much time talking and coaching. And so social maturity is what allows us to then come back around and say, maybe the personal maturity I need right now is just to be quiet and to observe and give the client chances to reflect and catch up with themselves. What could we see then more clearly than we would do if we otherwise fill up the space with lots of talking? Um, and here's the last one, what you can catalyze. So this is contextual maturity. This is the sort of, for me, the holy grail of coaching. So that we no longer do coaching, we are coaches. That coaching is who we are in some ways. This is the ability to stand in any context and have the maturity to discern what's happening right now, what's important right now, what is needed from me right now. And this is where credibility comes in. It's credibility for two reasons. One is you can discern what's happening enough to be able to articulate what's happening, and you're credible because what you're doing works more often than not. And that comes because you're now able to have the experience and the wisdom to sense what can I catalyze here or help the client catalyze here that would be most valuable for them. Okay. So I want to, we'll come back to this in a minute, so we'll take a pause in just a second here um, to, I want to give you a funny example of why this doesn't work, when this doesn't work. So I'll just be really brief here. So I was a swimmer all my life, and during college I got a job as a lifeguard at the pool. We had to take all kinds of training to get certified. And one of our classes was on group life saving. Like if you're at a lake and a boat capsizes, how do you save a group of people? And so I was a really strong swimmer. I think, probably the strongest person in our class. And we got to this session on group life saving as a test. So they actually had brought in a small rubber boat, put it in the middle of the pool, the big pool at the school, and got four students to sit in the boat. And then we all lined up on the side of the pool, and I unfortunately had to go first. The teacher blew her whistle, and I completely froze, even though we had been trained on everything. So why did I freeze? So I'm going to go through these maturities. So I had the wrong mindset. In my mind, I was thinking, I've got to demonstrate that I'm a good lifeguard. I was already focused on the wrong perspective. I was focused on myself. And I was looking at myself and saying, I don't have the skills to save all those people. How am I going to do this? So I panicked. I was all of like, what, 19? And so I had all the skills, but I was focused on myself and my skills. And what was I thinking I needed to do? How am I going to be the hero here and save all these people by myself? Um, and yes. So the shift I never made was I'm not there to be a good lifeguard. I'm there to be a good leader. Where am I supposed to be looking? Over here. There's five lifeguards, one for each person who's drowning in the middle of the pool. So I missed the whole focus on the whole. I focused not on their need in the pool and the need of these people to be given permission because I was sort of being the head person at the time. And then so instead of guiding the team, I was obsessed about my failure to be the hero. And all this took place in the midst of nanos. I mean, I realized what had happened very quickly, but by then the teacher had mercifully blown the whistle again and saved me from that sort of agony of realizing I'd completely screwed up. So instead of adapting in those few seconds, I was stuck in the wrong frame. And the wrong frame, that wrong capacity, dominoed into all the rest. If I had just stopped for a second and looked over here, all of that shift would have come into play. And so I offer this. So I was still the strongest swimmer. I was still the best lifeguard. But in real time, at that moment in time, I was not. All those skills were for naught. All that training was for naught. All that strength was for naught because I was coming from the wrong story. And so for me, I offer that to say that a lot of what helps us become better at what we're doing in coaching, a lot of what helps our clients be better clients and be more successful, is much less about the things that we think often and much more about their maturity as a human being. Okay? So, what I'd like to do is just take a few minutes and just stop and see kind of what's on your mind, and then we'll come back and talk a bit more about the maturities. We're about halfway done. I think we're doing okay on time. So, um, but just sort of see kind of what's on your mind. And I'll take this down so we can actually see each other. Yeah, there we go. There's somebody, I'll let you, one of you all sort of call it anything from the chat box, but is there anything in real time that anybody would like to share? Hmm.
I will, David.
Excellent.
Hi, I'm Selena.
Good.
I met you many, many years ago with Podrag, Sullivan and Carol, but it's a very, very
Oh,
long time
oh,
ago.
what? Yes, of course. Yeah, he's done
Yeah,
quite
many
well with
years
his
ago.
podcast, I see. So that was nice to see.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's by the by. I'm really enjoying the framework that you're talking about, and I'm I'm really finding the same thing in terms of what's resonating for me with leaders at the moment is that sense and that maturity of just being able to hold them, be there. And sometimes that can be a little bit about guidance, and sometimes that's
Mm-hmm.
what they're asking for.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's absolutely okay with the maturity
Mm-hmm.
and with the permission and the right calibration and knowing the client and knowing your relationship with them. But I think there does come a maturity to know that. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that clients are really needing a lot more from us. And I
Yeah.
think that that means that we have to call on so many things within us. So
Mm-hmm.
what you're saying is really resonating for me.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I used to teach a lot of really fancy leadership programs, and I don't do that anymore. I don't find them useful. It's I don't know what I would teach a leader right now in many ways, and a lot of the models don't. Anyways, I've just been starting to really explore if I take all this to the next level, what does it mean at doing things at scale for organizations? And my other body of work, integrative development, has been working that for a long time. But I feel like one of the things that's coming, and you'll see this in a few minutes, for coaching is really getting out from our sessions into the wild with our clients in a way. And so I'll talk more about that. But Matthew,
Yes. Yeah, as I mentioned in the chat, lots of stuff to process. But one thing that's coming up for me right at the moment, I work internally and have got a
mm,
lot of job plus coaches. So people that are
hmm
pretty junior coaches but are
mm,
engaging in coaching. And so I'm curious, what's your thoughts in terms of trying to introduce fairly new coaches to this kind of framework? Because obviously some of that stuff is going to be a long way from where they're at now. So do you find it still quite valuable for new coaches to have this early on? And if so, how do you help them to
yeah.
access it?
So so I would argue yes, it's useful for any level of coach. It's easier for people that are more experienced because they can relax a bit more. But I think what I've observed for a long time is that a lot of what our participants end up doing is letting go of a lot of how they were trained. And if I go those first two maturities around personal and spiritual maturity, it's not that these people are not competent coaches yet, but they're not mature enough to understand what's actually happening or what's actually being asked of them. And so we've done a lot of work with a lot of our newer students where we tell them to not even try to learn coaching yet. We get them just to watch videos. We get them to watch videos with the sound off. We get them to do body works, meditation work. Um, get to know yourself. Stop pretending like you've got to be helpful. And I often tell my students, stop trying to be helpful. It's not useful. And so I feel like they bring a naivete, which also can be quite helpful. They're not attached to things that maybe more experienced coaches are. And many of them I imagine are younger, so they live in a very different world than the world that you grew up in, and certainly that I grew up in. And so part of it might be just inquiring of them, like, how do you learn? How do you get better at things? The example I give, in the old days, you had to spend decades to become a professional guitarist. And now you watch these 12-year-olds playing exquisite, extraordinary Eddie Van Halen riffs. Why? Because they can stay up all night watching YouTube. And so I think part of it's like not seeing them as novice coaches, but as different coaches. And what do they bring that maybe you can't bring or I can't bring? What is the organization? And there's a whole bunch of people in the organization that are just like them, same age, same demographic. And how might their naivete actually help us rethink coaching? Um, and so what we find, I'd rather have a wise beginner than a very seasoned, immature person. Um, and so, yeah, that's what I would say.
Really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Maybe one more comment, and then we'll talk some more about what these maturities do for us. Hmm.
David, I was just reflecting on how we sometimes connect maturities with age, and I liked that you just said about the notion of wisdom. I'm
Mm.
wondering if when we're encouraging young coaches, we recognize that there can be a 15-year-old whose life experience has given them a maturity
Yeah,
that
you bet.
a 60-year-old doesn't have. And I'm wondering how whether you've come across any barriers to thinking that maturity equals age and length of experience as opposed to what they've actually dealt with probably in the workplace or in their life.
Yeah. So maturity, I mean, maturity is a sort of a natural process that can occur at any time in life. It's how we heal wounds. It's how we resolve difficult experiences. Um, uh, so if you think about like, if you've lived long enough, you encounter traumatic experiences. I had a whole boatload of them. Part of why I do what I do is because of the early part of my life. And I saw what happens. I didn't get any support for any of that. So I struggled for a long time and well into probably my 20s and 30s. Not anymore, but and so I think it's like in going back to Matthew, your piece, like how do we help these younger coaches or these newer coaches access the maturity they've already gained, maybe in other parts of their life, overcoming adversity, taking on something brand new, risking trying, whatever it is for them. Um, and so, and all know a lot of old people that are duds, right? That never matured. They're just older versions of the same person they've always been, right? And so maturity can, I've one of my favorite older people in my life from years ago. She died of a heart attack while in a painting class at 94. And I thought, what a perfect way for her to go, doing the things she loves, right? And so I think the maturation, and so we're part of why we don't set goals in narrative coaching is because the person who's going to achieve the goal is not the person who sets the goal. They will mature to become the person who can do this. So trying to set a
Mhm.
goal with an immature person is not useful because the odds of them failing are high. And so
Mhm.
what scaffolding do they need? What foundation would they need in order to be able to even see this, let alone do this well?
Mm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So if we had a pint, we could do this all day long, but we don't. So I'd like to just move on if that's okay, and keep putting things in the chat box if you want us to track some things that are coming up. Let's go back here. All right. So I want to sort of build on what we've said, and we can be fairly brief about this. It'll be provocative, but I've already shared some of this. But I looked at sort of 5 myths that are common in parts of coaching and how the five maturities, I think, helps us. So this is the first one. And so we see a lot of rebellion now against competency models because people are tired of being assessed on somebody else's definition of what coaching is supposed to be. And so we end up with a lot of people feeling straitjacketed and stuck in a box. And so that's, I don't think, very useful anymore. Um, so this is what I'm advocating for instead. So my my primary measure of and my ethical guardrails are built around integrity. Am I in integrity with myself? Am I doing things I'm qualified to do? Am I in integrity with my agreements with my client in terms of what they've asked of me? Am I in integrity for contributing to the greater good of society? Am I in integrity to any peers I'm accountable to so that I'm doing what I need to be doing? But I want to be free to use all of who I am, all of what I know, and all that I have done as a resource in coaching. And to me, it will be, if it's packaged as coaching or sold as coaching, we can call it that. But I'm not limited by what other people think coaching is, as long as I'm acting within integrity. And so the quick example will give you is the leader that I coached who came in and was visibly a wreck that day. And normally she was a very stellar leader. I asked her what was going on. She said, my mother died unexpectedly earlier this week, and I have to plan a funeral for her and to manage all the politics of my family. I don't go to church. I've been to funerals, but I've never done one. And so if I were just to stay in the coaching lane, I would try to coach her around that. But I said to her, well, it's your lucky day because in my early career, I did lots of them. And I know a lot about planning funerals and hosting funerals. So we spent the entire coaching session planning her mother's funeral, music, words, everything. And then she went on bereavement leave and was away for a couple of weeks, did the funeral, did all of that. And she was very close to her mother, oldest child. Um, I did my father's funeral, so I could relate. And she came back and she shared. We spent the whole session debriefing that 2 weeks and about her appreciation for the support to do that and how it went. But she said, you know, in the end, as I reflect on these last couple of weeks and what that's meant for me as being a leader in my family in a way, she said, I think I learned more about myself as a leader than all the other leadership programs been on. And so for me, and someone would say, well, that's not coaching. And I'm saying it's the wrong question, right? She doesn't care this is not coaching. I don't care this is not coaching. And they say, well, yeah, but her company's paying for this. Yes. And look what an amazing human being she's become having moved through this experience. She was literally was a different person in some really wonderful ways. For example, she said, people really seem to like my leadership and I spend a lot of time with my people, but I'm realizing I don't really know much about their lives and I don't really spend a lot of time seeing how they're doing. And I'm always up here at that strategic level. And so this experience invited her to spend more time just relating to her team as human beings. Okay, so that's the first one. Second one, and this goes back to the question of Matthew's question. One of the reasons that holds back beginning coaches is they feel they don't know enough yet, which is true. They don't. But we have this sort of myth that we have to understand everything our client tells us so that we can be helpful. And the funnest example of this for me is at the end of retreats that I've run in other countries. Sometimes people want some extra help, and we do a little mini coaching session, and I ask them and encourage them to talk to me in their native language, which I don't know. They said, "But you want to understand what I'm saying." I said, "I don't need to know what you're saying. I need to just watch you, and I need you to understand what you're saying." Um, and so, for me, I want us to be free to help the client. That's my focus, so that they can be open to deepening their understanding and their growth. And so by watching their facial expressions, their gestures, their change in tone of voice, um, what the story that seems to be emanating from them, I can reflect back what I'm seeing. And as long as they understand my English questions, we will be fine. So I just want to encourage us to begin to think about what is our role in terms of what we're looking for in coaching. All right, so third one. I always like how the animations sort of change their mind when I'm sleeping. I must coach to the competency models because they are a useful measure. They're not. There's actually very little science behind most of the competency models. And so I want to be free to evolve how I work. I want to be able to coach with a sense of deep humility. I want to be accountable for all my agreements with my clients and accountable for my own growth and my own choices. And I want the clients to do the same. And so some of the competencies might be helpful reminders to me of things I might want to develop. But in the end, they're not for me a guide or a structure for how I develop myself, let alone how I think about coaching. Because you can be quite competent and not a very good coach because you don't know what to use when. Fourth one, and then we'll stop here for a few minutes around social maturity. So, yeah. So I remember when I was a child, I loved art, and one of the first I went to some painting classes after school because I just found that so much fun. And one of the first activities the teacher had us do, which I thought was brilliant, because as a kid you learn about hand-eye coordination and you learn about coloring with coloring books, coloring within the lines. And so one of the first things he had us do was he got these old coloring books, and we each got a page on the coloring book. And he said, "Now I want you to completely ignore the lines and paint on here, however you would want." And at first we're like being really careful. I said, "No, just paint." So then we started throwing paint at this thing, and so it just made a mess of this paper. He said, "That was a developmental stepping stone for you when you were a child. You're not a child anymore. The whole mission now is for you to find your own voice and your own expression." Um, and again, competencies can be really helpful. Here are the lines of coaching, right? Here are some frames and models and methods as scaffolding, but never forget they're only scaffolding. And so for me, I want to be able to improvise in the moment in whatever way I feel will support what the client needs most right now. So I'm only really interested in two things when I'm coaching in some ways. What does this person need most right now? And what are they ready for in that space? Everything else to me is moot. Um, and I find in this time when we're all can be overwhelmed by so much, that what people are ready for is much smaller than they might have been some years ago. And a lot of what we're doing now is building scaffolding for people, even to get through their day, um, and to try to begin to plant seeds for things that are going to come that we might need next. All right. Um, so the last one. Um, and this is one I sometimes, and I'm guilty of this myself. I even have a PhD that was based in coaching. So we have this sort of obsession with acquiring more tools and certificates, and which are great, and it's a noble intent. But I want us to sort of begin to imagine, going back to the young woman on the first slide, that to be free to just be ourselves, to be the work, to mature ourselves, so that we can walk with our clients into the unknown. We don't know where we're going. We don't know what's necessary. We're going to discover that with them. And so for me, it's much more, our sponsors often want certainty. Coach this person on these three things so they can do these four things. And well, it's absurd. It's completely absurd. We have no idea. We can hold true to the intent of this person seems to have a need to get better at these things. How we're going to get there, what that's going to look like, the speed that's going to take is something we can't know. And so part of our tension as coaches is how do we please both clients and sponsors and reality? And so for me, this contextual maturity helps us to be able to navigate the tensions between those spaces. And for me, it's this is I default to this one and holding in the back of my mind what other people might be wanting out of coaching. and making sure that the client is always alongside of me and as best as possible in front of me, so that they can chart their own course through this. So you'll have a copy of the slides, and so I'm just going to put all this up just to show you this. So I'm not going to do this with you now because we won't have the time, but this is a exercise we do a lot in our work. It's just a way for you to reflect on something that's happened, and it's what you wished had been different. And so I'm just going to invite you. You can welcome to take a picture or a screenshot or whatever, but you also will have the slides, so this will be in there. And it's just a great way to start sort of familiarizing yourself with the five maturities and how you might think about this for yourself. Okay, so how are we doing on time? Oh, we're close. We'll get there, I think. Wherever we get to is where we'll get to. All right, so maybe time for a question or two, and then we'll just begin to close. Again, I'll take this down so we can see each other. Oops, stop sharing. Anything that's coming up for, oh. Yeah. So okay, who's asking this? Joe. So in the book, I talk about vertical maturity, horizontal maturity, and what we call triaxial maturity, which has to do with mobility. The ability to move at any point in time along those other dimensions. And so for me, the last section will address some of this, but um, uh, I would say now that probably 60 to 70% of my work with clients is on maturation, not on skills, not on deliverables, not on goals. Never was much about goals. Goal theory is great, but goals themselves I find not very useful, especially now. And so a lot of it, we're trying to help people. And so this is like, for example, I was a hospital chaplain in my early career. I was a grief counselor. I was a suicide prevention person. I know a lot about changing grief. So a lot of what people are doing now is grieving, right? We're still grieving from the pandemic. We've never really dealt with that, I don't think. And so, and clients are being, I mean, especially leaders are being tasked with so much now it's not humanly possible. And so a lot of it's maturing them. What do you want to do about that? You could try to, work harder, but how's that going for you? Right? Working with learning and development people, moving away from the fantasy that what we're doing in training programs is actually working. And what else might we do to be more courageous, more evidence-based about the kind of things that people actually need right now? And so for me, the more we can model this, the more we can invite our clients into this, the more we can start to scale this inside organizations to rethink how we're developing people from the ground up. Anything else for right now? And then I'll just share a couple of closing slides for you. Sue had to go out into the field and pick some flowers. All right, let me just put this back up and then we can close. We're closing at 10 after, is that correct? I'm looking at.
I think 20 past.
7:20, yeah.
Oh, so I have 20 minutes.
Yeah, you've got at least 15 minutes there, David.
How exciting. Well, then we actually could do that, but let's finish these slides and then see what feels important to you all. Okay. All right, I think it's this one. Continue to share, yes. All right. Yes, I already said yes. Okay, so this is probably the simplest distillation of what I'm trying to say. And so there, if we go back to the first slide, as I've done this over time for so long now, I'm really just holding space for something that's trying to emerge in my conversations with clients. We have a process in ID called structured emergence. And our work really is, what is this moment bringing to us? It's moving through this space, this time, the field that we're working in. It's moving through us. And yes, part of us is tracking the larger gestalt of what's going on. Part of us is tracking kind of what the aspiration is from the session. But what's happening in that space is much more emergent and much less something that we need to control. And so the way I think about that is the fundamental, the core skill is astutely perceiving what is present in the field and what that's calling for. That's I would say, and this is going back to Matthew, your piece about newer coaches. This is the fundamental thing I would teach them. What's happening? What are you noticing right in front of you? Have them go to meetings, have them go to events and just take notes. Like, what are you noticing? Giving them some frames. They could give them the 5 maturities frame, right? What are you noticing here? And without judgment, without labels so much, but what are you seeing? And then they come back and report on what they're seeing. Well, so how do you think about what you're seeing? How do you feel about what you're seeing? What are the implications of what you're seeing? Why do you see that and not this? What is your neighbor seeing that you didn't? Why is that? Um, and um, and I feel like for all the things I've brought to my work, this is probably my greatest strength. I just see more than most people, and always have since I was a child. And it's what it's allowed me to do when I do well. This is what allows me to do that. And so a lot of what we teach now is helping people be more perceptive and more receptive to what's actually happening right in front of them, without having to label it or badge it or put it in a box. And so the phrase we look at is, this moment is the curriculum. And so this moment that we're in, so a client is talking about something that's made them angry. Anger is our curriculum. So what are we being asked to notice about that? Well, we might ask the client, are you aware that you're angry? Your face seems to be angry. Your words seem angry. Do you notice the anger? Where does it reside in you? Do you notice this in other parts of your life? We're helping them to develop some deep knowledge or deeper knowledge of themselves, an awareness of themselves. Because if they don't even notice this, then you can't do anything with them. If they only notice a few things, you're very limited in what's possible. The more they notice and can be present to, which is again their own personal maturity, the more they have available to actually work with. If they are being asked or they notice too much before they're ready, they get flooded, they also are not very effective. So that's why readiness and expanding the scaffolding, if you want to academically geek out, this is all the work of Lev Vygotsky in zones of proximal development, and all the work I've done for years on attachment theory. This is all about attachment work in the end. And then the more they can notice and notice with some kind of grace and awareness, then the next question is, what are we being invited to learn here? And so, for example, you have a client that's really angry and upset about something, really maybe disappointed or feels betrayed or whatever's happening for them. So what are they being invited to learn about themselves? How did you get to be in this position? And what are you being asked to learn as the coach? I'm noticing that I'm wanting to rescue them. I'm noticing I'm uncomfortable with their strong emotions. I'm noticing that I'm trying to pacify them so they're not so angry. I might need to learn to hold more space with people that have strong emotions. And then, so who would you become if you could learn this? And then, and so then in our model, this is what we think of as the shift phase. What are we being asked to become here? And what's being asked of both of us, both individually in the coaching engagement, but also relationally together? These are what in attachment work are called moments of meeting. And then the final question is, what would that make possible if we became this? So if I as a coach could mature in the moment and realize I'm uncomfortable with strong emotions, but I can do some breathing. I can do whatever I need to do to kind of become more present. Then I can hold space for you as the client, which means you feel safer and more able to do the work you need to be doing. And so that together, not only is the client maturing, you're maturing, but the relationship's maturing. So it can now hold bigger conversations, which is what that makes possible. And so my question for you, just kind of to move into these final couple of slides, is what curriculum is currently present in your life or your practice as an invitation to mature? So I'm just going to stop for a minute.
David, there's a question in the chat. I
There
wonder whether
is.
yes, Rachel Collis has just asked whether you could expand further, please, on how the previous slide relates to attachment.
Oh, yes. So, so in the moment of meeting literature, well, where do I begin? Um, so an infant is unable to regulate themselves, full stop. So an infant requires caregivers to help them regulate with them, and then before them, and then with them. Um, so, um, so a baby is not aware. Oh, I'm angry. The baby just cries or does whatever the baby does. So part of our job as a parent is to witness them appropriately and accurately, so that we can respond in a way that helps them feel soothed and met. The more that they feel that, the more they can calm down or relax or feel connected or whatever. So and so in that, a lot of what we're doing in coaching is helping clients notice themselves, often in ways that they're not allowed to notice themselves at work. Like, I'm afraid. I'm going into the board meeting. I feel like I'm going to be attacked. I know I'm going to be attacked. You know, for all of you women on the call, the way that, that women are still treated in companies is appalling. Often, not always, but often. So the attachment work is all we're doing in the beginning is witnessing somebody so they feel like they've got sort of that safe haven. I'm okay. I can be here. I can allow myself to feel. I can allow myself to notice myself. I can allow myself to be aware of things that might be difficult for me. And then from that place, then they're more able to move to the next one. Well, therefore, from that place, what am I being invited to learn now? This is called a secure base. So, and this is where scaffolding is so important and readiness is so important. So, an analogy for an infant. So, one of the steps of learning how to walk is learning how to stand. And they're not very tall, so they fall over a lot, but that's okay. They're close to the ground. But so you think scaffolding. So what's scaffolding? That's the parent's pant leg. They hold on that because they can't quite stand up yet themselves. They haven't learned how to do that because balance has not come yet. So we're doing this now with our adults in coaching, helping them to see what is this story you're telling me, revealing about what you're being asked to learn. And if I can help you become aware of yourself and notice yourself as you're telling this story, notice where it sits in your body and how it feels as you're telling the story, what I'm observing in you telling your story, what are you being asked to learn, which then requires scaffolding because obviously if they're having to learn this, they don't know this yet or had forgotten it, which requires risk. And one of you'll see this on the final slide I have, but um, one of the things that makes coaching less effective, not because of coaching, but because of the way it's used, is that most adults have no place to practice being a better human being. They have no place to practice what they've learned from you in sessions. And we don't do that in any other aspect of life. Sports, music, art, cooking, where we create practice spaces. So a lot of what we do in narrative coaching is do nothing but create experiments in the session so they can learn in real time with us. And I tell them there is no safer place on the planet right now than right here. If you can't do this with me, you're not going to do this later under pressure. You just won't, for the most part. So from attachment, that secure base is let's create a space in which you can have the courage to learn, and face things that will may be difficult for you. And then the next piece is called a working model. So that's building up a narrative. I'm somebody who can do this. I have a way of now navigating the world that makes sense to me, and I know how to kind of do what I need to do. So this is who are you being called to become? So in narrative coaching, this is, like I said, the shift phase where we're creating these experiments. So, somebody says, I want to be more assertive on my team. So great, what would that look like? And they might describe some of that, and we can teach them some things about that they might learn. And then I might say, okay, so I'd like you to tell me one thing you wish I would do differently as your coach. Well, nothing, you're fine. You're not. No, 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 come on. You said you wanted to be more assertive. Here we go, right now, in real time. And so then our job again, we are witnesses to this journey. So then I'm reflecting back. I notice you stand up straighter now. I noticed you actually willing to look at me now. I noticed that you speak instead of in the I language as opposed to you language. So what are you noticing about yourself? Oh, I feel more confident now. Great. So then we might sort of scaffold it up. What's the next level of conversation you could have? So what you're doing is you're changing somebody's working model of themselves. And because what they're going to be wanting to do differently or feel differently or be differently is going to start with who they're becoming. That is for me, it's the fundamental measure. Have they become a better, more mature human being as a result of this work? And then we look at the last one, which what does this make possible? This is sustained for us, but this is taking what worked from their time with us and saying, where else could you do this that would be meaningful and important to you? So what would this work we've just done make possible for you? From an attachment perspective, has to do with systems. So the child is now able to move through the family system in a more mature and agile and successful way. If a child feels has a poor attachment, they get stuck and trapped in systems that are less than functional, and then they adopt patterns and working models about life, about how one needs to get things done. So what we're trying, if people want to do things that are different in coaching, they've got to be able to kind of move through this and use their current moments or their current experiences as the curriculum itself. And so everything's done in real time. We don't talk about fancy words. We don't use a lot of terminology. We just do real live experiments. And then we say, where else could you use this? And what would that make possible for you if you could do that? Okay. Oh, it's almost time. I need to stop now. So I want to show you the last two slides because they feel important, and then we can close it out from there. Is that okay? I'm looking at the bosses on my screen. All right. Did that. Yeah. So we've already talked about this. It's just a way to kind of bring this all together. And so ultimately, this is a call for deeper incarnation. It's not about having to strive to get somewhere. Maturity is not a destination. It's a way of being. And some days we're mature and some days we're not. But these are, I should have sequenced these. But anyways, here they are. They're all here now. So I'm going to let you read this for a minute, and then I just want to make a couple of comments, and then we'll close out. Okay. So these are three of the things I talk about in the book about where I think coaching is going. Um, so one is that we inherit clients, and I believe that our work is going to take us further upstream to where clients' issues emerge, and further downstream through AI and other resources to support them to actually implement what they're doing with us in sessions. And I believe that the session itself will become not the norm. They're too expensive and they take too much time. And they're not necessary for most of the things that people need, especially if you look at the first one. And we saw this in the presentation from the guy at Google and what's coming with technology, which is how to get support for behavior change and mindset change in real time when and how you need it. And that the sessions will become interspersed with a variety of other ways of interacting with clients. Many of us already do this, but I think that will be increasingly the norm. And I love Freire's insight about this. We often treat people as objects, like putting them in workshops, and then want them to go out and be subjects who have authorship over their lives, and it doesn't work. And so part of the value of the 5 maturities for me is it's inviting us to a whole different theory beyond pedagogy and even andragogy to this notion I called phronagogy. So, which is all to do with collective wisdom. And then lastly, I think we'll move beyond coaching as an independent practice. It'll be integrated more overtly with a variety of other skills we have to create hybrid practices or integrative practices that will be, I think, increasingly necessary for the systemic issues that our clients are bringing to us. Okay. All right, there you go. It's a whirlwind tour of David's crazy mind. I'm going to take this down now. And it's still 11:20. I just made it.
11:20 in Amsterdam.
It is for me.
Thank you so much, David. That has been a hugely thought-provoking presentation, and I can see a few nods and comments. Similarly, I think that really resonated for me when you talked about I am a coach, and it's about deploying self to circumstances, and as you quite rightly say, working out how to glean all those different maturities to meet the needs of the person in the here and now in front of you. So a huge thank you from all of us. We have any other closing comments? Yes, I can hear Inga. We've got a lucky door prize. So I might hand over to Inga to announce who that is. I can see some lovely thank yous coming through in the chat. David, I'd hate for you to miss those. Thanks, Inga.
Thank you very much, Liv. We like to give a lucky door prize, if you can call it a door. You've all come through some sort of window to be here from wherever you are.
A portal prize.
Portal, should we call it? A bit like the TARDIS. And this time it's complimentary attendance to Julia Carden, who's doing a session for us in October. Her book and her session is titled, You Are Not as Self-Aware as You Think You Are. So that's a challenge if ever there was one. I had a list of names and I threw my pen onto them. Not distracted by your session, David. I did do it right at the end. Okay. And we would like to give 2 complimentary prizes. The first one my pen landed on was Selena Ryan, who's here from New South Wales. Selena, you're here? Yes. So we will send you the information, but please make a note that we'd love you to come along to Julia Carden's session in October. And the second one, Janine Daniels, who I think also I saw is still on the screen. Yes, Janine. So both of you, you're our lucky member winners for this evening. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Liv, did you have any future news to share or parting?
Well, David has just mentioned in the comments, and I think we need to draw attention to the fact that David's book is going to be available next month. Yes, David, is that right?
Yeah.
So of the same name, the 5 maturities, and where can we access? I know you mentioned in this that it will be in the
Yeah.
slides that you share
I'll
with
just put these
everybody.
up again, but
Fabulous. Thank
yeah,
you.
so go back up here. Yeah, so this is what the book looks like. So that's the
Great.
cover of the book, and it will be out next month on all the usual spaces. And then if you want to know more about what we do, there's the Institute website, and then I have a site for myself now as well, so you can find out more about me. And you'll have the slides, I think, afterwards, so you can, yeah.
Yes, we will share those. Thank you,
Okay.
David. That's great. Excellent. And then, of course, for our community, Come As You Are is tomorrow morning. So if you'd like to connect with peers for an informal conversation, maybe about today, one of our hosts is possibly on this session tonight and has said, maybe I'm going to throw out the agenda and some things that have been discussed tonight might be taken to a deeper level, perhaps, of conversation as part of that group. So I'd welcome you to join us tomorrow morning if you are free. Any comments? I can see some beautiful tributes of thanks to you, David. I don't know if anyone is brave enough to come off mute that would like to either say hello or thanks in person.
I've already acknowledged that I'm quite a groupie, David. So I would like to say just thank you so much. I'm now very interested about the dissolution of sessions and what that might mean as an external coach and practitioner. But that's a conversation over a glass of wine, I think, that I probably need to have. But that really sparked my interest, thinking, how does this new world, where does it go? Yeah.
So one of the things I'm exploring is, and I know Sue and came to some of the retreats we used to run, and I probably won't do those anymore. But I'm hatching this idea of like almost like a workshop, but not like a traditional workshop, but like a woodworking workshop where we're actually doing something. That we take all these things and we can put them around the room on posters, and we actually deconstruct our practices and reconstruct them using this thinking. Not as a rule book, but as sparks of inspiration. Because I feel like we often feel like we have to do all this by ourselves. We have to figure all this out by ourselves. It gets very lonely, I find. And we go to sessions, but then we're like talking about our fabulous clients. We're doing all these things, and I would like to have the honesty and the transparency of our old retreats. And so there would be personal development, but it would be in the course of reimagining our practices and helping each other do that, sharing ideas, sharing failures, successes. And so maybe just planting some seeds that maybe somebody somewhere on your continent might want to organize something. And we
We have communities of practice which have come back, which are peer-to-peer exchanges, David.
Yeah.
I do wonder whether that is an
Yeah.
opportunity. I can see Anne has come off mute. Anne, I wasn't sure whether you wanted to join the conversation.
Oh, thank you, Olivia. Hi, David. I've never met you before, and I wish I had met you a long time ago. But I listen to wherever I can find you on podcasts. And my question was, have you been on any recently that you can share with us?
Well, I've actually, as you say that, I just was on a podcast with Miranda from AC, and it's kicking off a whole series on AI and the future of coaching.
Oh, wow.
So I'm their opening podcast, and my dear friend Rebecca, some months from now, is the closing podcast. So that was the last one I did. That was just a few weeks ago. And I support a consortium of AI and coaching people in Germany, and so they're called Viva La Coaching, and they've got a podcast conversation with me from New York. They were part of my New York workshop. I think that's dropping tomorrow as well. But you can just Google Viva La Coaching, and you can find that podcast. So those would be the two that are the most recent.
Oh, fabulous. Thank you.
And I'm not quick enough to pop it in the chat, but on the AC website, you can find the podcast link in the furthest right-hand corner.
Somebody's got it.
Fabulous.
You.
Thank you.
And I've just added, we'll put it in the AC LinkedIn communities as well, following up from today, because I'm sure there'll be a lot of us wanting to follow that. So that's great.
Yeah.
Any final words before we let David get on with his day? He's at the start of the day, and we're all we're all at the end.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining us too, from across Australia, from Italy, and from Hong Kong. So it's been a fabulous session, and we'll look forward to seeing you all again at some stage. Thank you, David.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Pleasure. Bye.